Hola a todos, Latinoamérica, muy buenas tardes. Gracias por su presencia en esta gran sesión que tenemos hoy día. Como ustedes ya sabrán y están interesados y por eso están aquí presentes, hoy día vamos a hablar de internacionalización a través de Miami con uno de nuestros partners, CIC Connect. Así que bienvenida Ale, Cristina, y ustedes me van a hacer la introducción también con Michael. Gracias por su tiempo, por esta charla que nos van a dar. Hay mucha gente interesada, así que para que aprovechemos el tiempo, cuéntenos por qué estamos aquí.
Muchas gracias, Iván, por la invitación. Estamos muy contentos de estar hablando. Tal como dijiste, hola Latinoamérica, hola a todos. Estamos acá con Cristina y con Mike. Me encantaría partir compartiendo pantalla y vamos tomando la palabra para explicarles quién es CIC, qué hacemos y por qué estamos acá.
New at 6, our local program is helping businesses expand in the United States
by connecting them to resources needed to thrive.
Startups fail and fail again, trying to do this on their own, with no network, not understanding the culture, not understanding how to do business here in the US.
The energy here is contagious. It's not about just providing services, but it's really more about being around like-minded people and like-minded startups.
We want to scale and enter the US market. I don't think there's another way except through the soft landing program.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, me encantaría partir presentándome, que sepan quién soy. Entenderán por el acento que soy chilena. Vivo en Estados Unidos hace alrededor de 8 años. Mi nombre es Alejandra Vinter, soy directora de CIC Connect. Les voy a explicar más en detalle qué es CIC Connect. Y parte de mi historial profesional es, fui parte del equipo fundador de IF. Me vine a Estados Unidos cuando ya estábamos abriendo el tercer edificio. Soy también parte de Rebellious, consultora en temas de management, y hemos hecho con ellos 2 reportes entendiendo, ¿cómo se llama esto? Todo el tema de management adentro del mundo de startups a nivel latinoamericano. Y el año pasado hicimos un capítulo especial en temas de internacionalización, que ha sido muy interesante. Estoy basada en Miami y con CIC Connect ya hemos ayudado a más de 200 emprendedores en su proceso de internacionalización. Y con eso dejo a Cristina que también se presente.
Gracias, Alejandra. Saludos a todos. Mi nombre es Cristina Urdaneta, soy venezolana, como podrán escuchar, pero también tengo mucho tiempo en Estados Unidos, casi 20 años. Estoy basada en la ciudad de Tampa, en Florida, y he trabajado con el mundo de startups y innovación por los últimos 8 años. Antes de trabajar con CIC, estuve con Babson College, una escuela de negocios en Boston, con foco en el emprendimiento, donde lideramos una aceleradora de emprendimiento femenino. Y antes de eso trabajé por 5 años en el Pérez Art Museum en Miami. Feliz de estar trabajando con startups latinoamericanas en esta instancia y de conocerlos. Le doy el pase a Alejandra para que nos comente un poquito más sobre CIC.
Y antes de darle el paso a Mike, queremos contarle quién es CIC. Quiero que sepan que la sesión de hoy día, una vez que nosotros terminemos de hablar, va a ser en inglés. Mike no alcanzó a preparar su español hoy día. No habla español Mike, así que... Pero partamos con qué es CIC. CIC, o CIC como le dicen en Latinoamérica, es Cambridge Innovation Center. Nosotros somos una empresa con fines de lucro, pero una empresa con sentido, que lo que nosotros creemos es que la innovación puede arreglar y mejorar los problemas que existen en el mundo. Estamos hoy en día en 11 distintas ciudades con edificios. Lo que hace CIC es armar campuses de innovación y con eso distritos de innovación y con eso comunidades de innovación. Eso es a lo que nos dedicamos. Partimos con un solo edificio en Kendall Square, que es la parte famosa de Cambridge, cerca de MIT. Hoy en día ya estamos en Europa, Asia y Estados Unidos. y tenemos 120.000 metros cuadrados de edificios y laboratorios. Dentro de nuestros espacios, en estos 25 años en que la empresa lleva funcionando, se han levantado 17 billones en Venture Capital dentro de nuestros edificios, oficinas. Desde que CIC fue fundado hasta hoy, tenemos una comunidad de 10.000 empresas. Es un número importante porque hoy en día las 10.000 no son clientes nuestras, pero lo que pasa es que siguen siendo parte de nuestra comunidad y sobre todo en Boston las empresas se instalan en el edificio al lado, en el piso de arriba y siguen estando muy conectadas a lo que somos nosotros. Y como también mencioné y pueden ver en la foto, nosotros también, para nosotros es importante todo lo que es biotecnología. Somos una empresa agnóstica, pero alrededor de un 20% está enfocado en ciencias de la vida. Por ende, también tenemos laboratorios en nuestra facilities, iba a decir, y voy a decir algunas cosas en Spanglish, pero en nuestros edificios tenemos laboratorios de investigación, laboratorios compartidos, laboratorios privados, entonces es una componente importante. Como decía, estamos en 11 ciudades con estos campuses de innovación. 3 de estos tienen laboratorios y tenemos acuerdos firmados para abrir en 2 lugares más, uno de esos es Seúl, los laboratorios. Y además hacemos programación, ya sea internacional o de otros tipos de programación, y en eso estamos en alrededor de 20 ciudades. Otra cosa que hace CIC es hacer vertical clusters, es decir, armamos estas comunidades de innovación, pero en una temática específica. Acá abajo están todos los logos que pueden ver en robótica, en movilidad, en energía eólica, sustentabilidad, comida, AI, temas marítimos y temas de food también. Y acá tengo un ejemplo que es Lab Central, que está en Boston, y me voy a ahorrar todos los números que están acá, pero para que se hagan una idea, el 2023 fue el 2022, el 2022, un 21% de todas las series A en biotecnología que se levantaron en Estados Unidos era de empresas que estaban en este espacio. Y CIC cofundó este espacio con la ciudad de Massachusetts. Y dentro de los programas están los programas internacionales, que es por eso que estamos acá. Lo que hace CIC es conectar toda esta red de expertos mundial que tenemos en todos estos lugares y conectar los ecosistemas de innovación a través de estos programas de internacionalización. Empezamos con los programas de internacionalización en el año 2016. Ya llevamos más de 50 cohorts. Nuestros clientes son Venture Capital, gobiernos, aceleradoras, universidades. Y con ellos armamos un programa específico para las startups que quieran buscar internacionalización. Y lo que hacemos con las startups es ayudarlas a ampliar su network, a entender cómo entrar en los nuevos mercados y a tener las herramientas necesarias para poder vender y levantar capital en estos nuevos mercados. Y estos años de experiencia nos han mostrado que varias de las grandes razones por las cuales las startups fallan en su internacionalización es porque no entienden bien las regulaciones del nuevo mercado en el que se están internacionalizando, porque entran en un mercado que es sumamente competitivo. Lo más probable es que los que ustedes nos están escuchando acá hoy en día, ustedes son el mejor, el segundo mejor en su país o en Latinoamérica, y cuando llegan a Estados Unidos se dan cuenta que hay 10 o 20 como ustedes. Entonces, en el fondo hay que ver cómo poder competir. Las diferencias culturales, y las voy a agrupar con temas de lenguaje, que no solamente se refiere a la diferencia de inglés y español, sino que es entender cómo hacer negocios, entender qué es lo que se espera en una reunión, cómo hacer small talk, etcétera. Esa cultura, esa diferencia cultural a veces es un choque bien grande y también es muy importante para elegir cuál es el mejor mercado. Product Market Fit, el copy-paste del país de origen es un error que vemos comúnmente y muchas veces se proyecta mal la cantidad de capital que se necesita para un Estados Unidos que está cada vez más caro. Y con eso lo que queremos es pasarle la palabra a Mike Burtov. Me encantaría que Mike, I'm going to translate to English now. I'm going to transition to English. Mike, I would love for you to introduce yourself. You do a much better job than I do, but I just want to say that Mike is part of the experts that are part of our program. Every time he gives a lesson, he gets a 10 out of 10, so he's the favorite for sure. So we're happy to have you here presenting to all of these people. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me start the presentation, I guess. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I will try to articulate what I'm trying to say carefully so everybody can hear me. If there are any questions, any comments, just put them into the chat, put them into the notes, and I'll get to them as we're going through it. Don't wait. If something is burning, something you want to talk about, please share and we'll address it as it comes up. So as Alejandra mentioned, my name is Michael Bertov. I am a serial venture-backed entrepreneur. I've run multiple companies from the initial kind of crazy idea to millions in revenue and millions of venture funding. I've been profiled on a mini Discovery Channel documentary and a mini CNN documentary. I have been a mentor and I have lectured at Harvard Business School. I have been on boards at the MIT Institute of Technology, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, on their innovation curriculum of tech stars. If you have watched Shark Tank, the TV show, you might recognize me from the show. I appeared on an episode of Shark Tank as well. I was an entrepreneur at residence at Florida International University, which is the 5th largest university in the United States, with thousands of students and many, many thousands of entrepreneurial teams. I'm also an inventor. I hold multiple patents. One of my inventions was on the cover of Time magazine in 2019 and named Invention of the Year. I'm also an award recipient from the Edison Award, which is an award given out to inventors in 2018. I'm the author of a pretty popular book on early stage startup fundraising. It's called The Evergreen Startup. And I've spoken center stage at TechCrunch, for example, in front of thousands and thousands of people, as in many other venues as well. And last but not least, I've been a part of the CIC as a community member. I have founded 3 companies out of the CIC's co-working spaces. I have been in that community for close to, I want to say 15 years. I don't want to date myself, but it has been a little while. A huge fan of the organization, and for the last few years, I've been participating in this soft landing program as well. So as we get going, I want to define the context of our conversation today. I want to ground the conversation in defining what a startup really is. So what I'm going to be talking today is market entry, or most specifically, the importance and the tactics of market entry into the United States, focused around one very specific element of market entry, which is probably the most important element, which we'll get to in a second. But let me define what a startup is for the purposes of our conversation here today, because the tools that I'm going to be talking about are going to be very different from a startup to an established company or to a small business. So by my estimation, a startup starts with the idea phase. This is a creation, this is an idea that you have identified something new that might solve a problem. Now, let me elaborate a little bit on this, because this first point is pretty counterintuitive to a lot of people. If you have been to business school, for example, if you have been part of a traditional organization or part of a traditional learning experience or a traditional entrepreneurial entity, you are going to look at a problem and you're going to identify a solution for it. That is the traditional way of thinking about innovation, about starting a company. You go into the market, you identify a problem, and then you identify an efficient, maybe a cost-efficient solution to that problem. Now, startups are generally not started from this perspective, as counterintuitive as it is. Most great ideas start with a solution, and then they find the problem, which is really the opposite of the way you would learn to do this in business school. So, if everybody here has heard the popular adage that something is a problem in search of a solution, or rather a solution in search of a problem, that adage aptly describes most revolutionary innovative startups. Google started with an algorithm and they didn't know what it could do. The microwave oven started with a random invention. Most plastics started as an invention and then they figured out, hey, we can make plastic. Pretty much all of the great ideas that have truly disrupted our status quo, that are truly innovative, started with the solution that then found a problem. And this is something that they refer to as product market fit. Product market fit isn't the solution This isn't the problem finding the solution. It's the solution finding the problem. So for a startup, for an innovation economy company like the types we're talking about, it is very important that you have an idea, a radical new solution. And the process of commercialization, the process of finding product market fit is the process of finding the best problem, the best set of problems, and the people who have those problems. So that's the first step, the idea phase. The second stage is what I call the invention phase. You have developed this idea to a point where it has a chance of working. You don't know if it works. You have no idea if it works. But you know it might have a chance of working on a technical level. The next stage is what I would call the product phase of a startup. The product phase is when your solution solves a problem. So now you have an untested idea in an untested market. And now you're saying that the idea might work and that the market for it might exist. This is the concept of product market fit. So these three stages here, the idea stage, the invention stage, and the product stage, I would consider are unique to startups. More traditional businesses will start at the company stage, where you have the resources and you're focusing on profitability, you're focusing on market share, you're focusing on business fundamentals to grow your company. The company stage, in my definition, is when a startup or a small business has enough resources to continue operating and avoid failing. By resources, I mean cash and people. So if it has enough money coming in from operations or from investors or from other sources that we'll discuss, it can keep going indefinitely. And it has the people to support its growth and to support any pivots that might come up in the company. The next stage is what I would call not a startup. This is when perhaps at one point you were revolutionary, you had some great ideas, you were really changing the status quo, but now nobody's looking at you and thinking, wow, this is an innovative idea. There's many examples of this. We'll get into a lot of them later. Ford, for example, the people who made the first mass-produced cars, when they launched, they were highly innovative, but 100 years later, they're not innovative anymore. Nobody would look at Ford Motor Company and say, wow, this is a radically innovative company. This is a startup. More contemporary example, also in the automotive space, Uber. Uber launched about 12 years ago. Very, very new company. I doubt that many people would look at Uber now and say, wow, this is an innovative company. So I think what's happening now, and we'll get into this in the next slide as well, is that transition from being a traditional company or being from a startup to being a traditional company is very much accelerating. But nonetheless, these are the phases that we are talking about. Now, I'm going to focus my conversation. My understanding is that most people here are in the idea, invention, and product stages of their company. So relatively early on. So you do have to worry about money. You do have to worry about markets. You do have to worry about people. And we're going to limit our conversation today about market entry into the United States for startups in those first three stages of their maturity. So this is, I run a consulting company. I do a consulting, I consult a lot of early stage companies and some later stage companies as well. And I recently had a client and they showed me this organizational chart. It's a biotech company. This is a real organizational chart from a real company that I personally knew. And they were trying to enter the United States market. And one of the first things that they shared, their business plan, a whole bunch of foundational documents about their company, and they shared this. Now, I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a couple of seconds, and I want you guys to take a look. And I want you guys to tell me who in this company actually makes money. Who brings the money in? Okay? Companies make money. That's really what companies do. Companies get money and they get market share, but those two things are pretty related, which we'll discuss. So who here makes money? This is an actual functional company. The product people in the first column, they just spend the money. They plan, they do technical and design, they do production, they spend money. Investment department, who to invest in, they spend money. Marketers, buying ads, all of that, that's spending money. They're just spending money. The technical folks, the scientists, they're spending money. Human resources, they're just spending money. who here actually makes the money? So, fascinatingly, this is not a unique example. And I'm sure when you guys first looked at this organizational chart, you looked at this and say, okay, yeah, this looks reasonable for a biotech company, for pretty much any company with slight modifications. And most companies really overlook that there's only one profit center in an organization. There are many cost centers, as in there are many parts of an organization that cost the organization money. But there's only one department, one group of people, which are the most valuable people of any organization that actually bring the money in. Now, if you are an engineer or a scientist, you will likely overlook these people. These people are called sales. These people are called partnerships. These are the only people who bring money in. And these are the people that we're going to be talking about. These are the most valuable people in an organization. They're the most valuable people for commercialization, and they're the most valuable people for expanding into new markets. And the reason I say that they're the most valuable is because the product is really very often not that well differentiated from other products. A car is a car. A Kia and a Bentley, they're functionally identical. Okay, a brand of shirt from your local bazaar is the same as a Balenciaga shirt. They're functionally identical. There is an adage in marketing. If you ask somebody what the difference between a rat and a squirrel is, the difference is hard to tell, but the difference is marketing. The difference is sales. So on the product side, even if there is a differentiation, that differentiation is often very difficult to communicate. That differentiation is usually well above that first level of contact that you would have with potential customers. So the difference is not the product, it's the sales. So let me expand on this a little bit more and why this concept is important for internationalization. The US is the main consumer of innovation because of the rapid expansion of how we treat our emerging companies. So what I mean by that, if you recall the example about Uber that I gave a couple of minutes ago, it took Ford over 100 years to start as a startup and become a non-innovative company. It took Uber about 12 years. In 2000, the average age of an S&P 500 company, S&P is the top index for technology companies in the United States. The average age for that company was 85 years old. This is in 2000. So these are old, mature companies that have gotten to be so big that they're in the 500 most valuable tech companies in the United States. In 2018, 18 years later, the average age of a company was 33 years old. Much younger, much younger. So the point from being born to the point of being in the top 500 most valuable companies in the United States really decreased significantly by over 50 years. The current projection is by 2027, in 2 years, the average age of an S&P 500 company will be 12 years old. Brand new companies, babies. It's expected that it'll take a company from zero, from birth, to being in the 500 most valuable companies in the United States, 12 years on average. The average age of a unicorn startup, a unicorn is industry jargon for a company that's worth over $1 billion, is 6 years old. Brand new companies. The reason I bring this up is because the cycle of innovation in the United States, from initial idea to evaluation, to an exit, to an inflection point in the company's life cycle, is accelerating far faster than any other country in the world. We are the largest consumers of innovation. We're the largest validators of innovation. And this market is the largest killer of innovation that's not up to par. If you want to prove that your idea is worthwhile and it can stand the rigors of the toughest innovation economy in the United States, the one that promotes you based on merit and makes you a unicorn in 6 years, or the one that says, no, you're not worthy of this market, that is the United States. Effectively, if you want to prove yourself, you hit the hardest market first. and that's where you commercialize. And today we're going to be talking about why and how to do that in the United States. So before we get into that, it's important to realize that startups are very different than mature companies. And startups make money in many, many different ways. If you are a venture-backed company, or if you are a company that is looking for investment, the general expectation is that the vast majority of the money in your bank account is going to come from your investors, not from your customers. When a company is born, at the very beginning, and this is a uniquely American perspective that has become pervasive across the world, but this was born with the venture capital industry in the United States in the 1970s and has progressed ever since. But what you have in the very beginning of a company is three things that you sell. You have your products. These are the goods and services that you sell to your consumers, to the end user of your products. You have your securities. These are stocks, bonds, options, or warrants. These represent the future benefit, the future revenues of your organization, the future success of your organization. But they represent the future, not the present. And then you have grants. Now, by grants, I use that term very loosely. By grants, I mean obligations. These are things that you promise to do in order to get funding now. Okay? If you, for example, get a grant that asks you to research something very specific, you research that very specific thing to be compliant with the grant. So you sell an obligation. You sell a limitation of your ability to do something. For example, a limitation of your ability to pivot. The two most important things, generally speaking, are products and securities. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between these two things. And again, this is important because from a US market entry perspective, because when you're entering the US market, you need to figure out what your company is actually selling here in the very beginning. Now, generally speaking, products are not available at the very beginning of a company. So at the beginning of the company, at the idea stage, you have an idea, you have an invention, but there's no product to sell yet. There are no customers that you can target, and there's no benefits that you can sell to them. Securities, on the other hand, are available immediately. Now, a security is the promise that your company will be successful in the future. A form of security is an angel investor or your own capital that you put in. So the day you quit your job or the day you spend $20 to buy a license to some software because this software is needed to develop your startup idea, you have invested in your company. So the first line of investment is generally from the founders or the founding team, and it is available immediately. So a security is something that you sell as soon as your company starts. Products are not regulated, generally speaking. Now, there are some industries that do put regulations on products. So, for example, if you're in the defense industry or if you're in the pharmacology industry, you cannot sell your products to anyone. You have to sell your products to very specific groups of consumers. Securities, on the other hand, are generally very highly regulated. So there's only a few people in your country, in the world, relatively speaking, that are legally allowed to buy your stocks, bonds, options, and warrants because you are a privately traded company. So until you're listed publicly on your stock market, it's very high regulatory environment, very high burden for people to be able to invest in you. In the United States specifically, there's the concept of an accredited investor, which is an investor that makes over $250,000 a year for over 2 consecutive years and has a net worth of over $1 million, excluding the value of their primary property. If that person meets this criteria, this person is legally allowed to buy securities from your company. Your country, other countries have different regulations, but they all have something very similar, as in you cannot sell your securities, your stocks, bonds, options, and warrants to regular people. There is always, almost always, a level of scrutiny, a level of competence that they need to demonstrate in order to be able to buy into a privately traded company, which does not have audited financials and that does not review publicly. So just keep that in mind when you're raising funding. Products are available in the public market. By public market means you can tell anybody You can tell on Facebook that you're selling your treadmills or that you're selling your services. You can advertise publicly. Securities, for the same reasons that we just talked about before, are not available in the public market. They're only traded in the private markets. As in, you cannot publicly solicit. You cannot go on Facebook and say, hey, I am raising money, invest in my company. That violates securities laws because you are targeting people with unsolicited offers of securities. This is why you should only communicate the specifics of your offering or even that you're fundraising to accredited investors, investors that you know are associated with venture capital, with angel groups, things like that, people that you know meet these criteria. Products, the next few things are going to be relatively counterintuitive. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Please ask. I'm happy to dive in. Products don't compete with other startups. What do I mean by that? A startup's product, let's say you have a truly innovative, revolutionary, unique idea. Almost all of your competition is not other young emerging companies that have truly revolutionary, unique, innovative ideas. They have no market share. You also have no market share. What you are competing with is the old way of doing things. You're competing with the way that people currently solve the problem that you are solving better. Now, from a product launch perspective, you're not competing with those other companies that have no market share. You don't compete with things that don't have market share. You're competing with the old way of doing things. So when you're selling, when you're positioning, when you're structuring your company, you're structuring it to be better than the old way of doing things. Now, with securities, on the other hand, it's radically different. When you're selling securities, your stocks, bonds, options, or warrants, you are directly competing with other startups. Now, what does that mean? Every fund, every group, every investor will be looking at multiple investment opportunities. And they have a limited sort of finance. They have a few $1 million, for example, that they can invest, and they need to choose who to invest it in. So those other startups, maybe in your space, maybe in somebody else's space that the fund is competent in, you are directly competing with them for funding. And that's something really important to keep in mind. When you are presenting, when you're selling your securities, you're selling them not on the product side. You're not saying your product is better. You're selling that your security is better than the security of the other startups that the investors might be evaluating, which is a fundamental difference. Their positioning is very different. The DNA of the fundraise is very different than the DNA of the product sale. Moving forward, products are designed to depreciate, as in they're designed to lose value. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say you go to an Apple store and you buy an iPhone. As soon as you bought that iPhone, it's lost value. It's worth less now. By design. It's now a used iPhone. You bought it for $1,000. Now it's worth $700, maybe $800. Immediately it loses value. Pretty much all products work like this. Securities, on the other hand, are designed to appreciate. So if I was to buy a share of Apple, one stock of Apple, I expect the value of that stock to go up. Not as fast, but I expect it to go up. So the value movement, the movement of the value of that asset that you purchased goes in the exact opposite direction. Products solve today's problems. So I bought that iPhone, to use that same example, because I want to make calls. I want to, go on Instagram. I want to use my apps. I want to take videos and photos. I have a problem that I have today that I want to solve with my iPhone. Securities, on the other hand, solve future problems. If I was going to buy a share of Apple, it's because in 20 years, I want to buy a big boat. I want to buy a big house. I want to be rich. I want to have money for my retirement. It's not a problem I have now. Not having money for my retirement is not a problem I have today, but it is a problem I anticipate to have in 20, 30 years. So it's important to keep in mind that the movement, not only the movement of the value of the asset, but also when the problem is being solved is a key component to selling securities. Now, I'm going to talk about grants that much because that's a little bit of a niche case. But that being said, market entry into any market is about making sales. Depending on the type of company you are, you either sell products or securities or a mix of both. But it's important to realize that the first market entry, my recommendation, is always through sales. So let's talk a little bit about pickles. So I like pickles. I'm sure a lot of people here like pickles. Pickles are very popular, salty cucumbers. Let's talk about the genesis of a company. So going back to the very beginning, and how companies are different from one area to another. So let's say you started a company in the United States that makes pickles, and you have this idea for an awesome pickle recipe. So you go to your local grocery store, you buy 10 pickles, you buy 10 cucumbers, you put them in your brine, you let them sit, and you have 10 pickles now. What do you do with these pickles in the very beginning? You go to your friends, you go to your family and say, hey guys, you want to try the pickles I just made? Try them. Let me know what you think. They love your pickles. You give it to your parents, you give it to your friends, you give it to your kids. Everybody loves your pickles. Awesome. What's the next step? Next step is you go, not to a grocery store maybe anymore, but maybe you go to the same grocery store and now you buy 100 pickles, right? So you bought 100 pickles, you put them in the brine, you make them. What do you do with them now? Well, 100 pickles is a little bit too much for your friends and family to eat. So now maybe you go to a local co-working space, or you go to see some friends that you don't typically see, and you give them some of your pickles. Everybody loves your pickles. Your pickle business is great. It's great. People love your pickles. They're saying this is the best pickle I've ever had. So what happens now? Now you have to get more pickles. Now you can't go to a grocery store and buy 1,000 pickles. Well, you can. It's just going to be very expensive. So you go right to a pickle farmer, for example, or a cucumber farmer rather, or a cucumber distributor. You go to a store that sells restaurant supplies, and you say, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy 10,000 cucumbers. You go there, you take the 10,000 cucumbers home, and you can't make them in your bathtub anymore. That's a lot of cucumbers. So now you have a bucket, you have a barrel, you have all this infrastructure, you have this technology that houses your brine. You put the brine in this big tub, you put the cucumbers in, and a couple of days later you have 1,000 pickles. That's great. So how do you sell them now? Your friends are not going to eat 1,000 pickles. I mean, they love your pickles, but that's a lot of pickles. Your family is not going to eat 1,000 pickles. That's too many pickles. So perhaps in the United States, you'd go to a farmer's market. You go to a small area where you can sell pickles, maybe one by one, maybe a dozen at a time to people that pass by, but people you don't necessarily know already. These are just people at this fair, at this event, who want to buy your pickles. And you'll sell you 10,000 pickles. You sell you 1,000 pickles, rather. It's going to be great. Everybody loves your pickles. That's great. So you've gotten to that point. What are you going to do? You're going to grow your business now. You want to make 10,000 pickles. 10,000 pickles. So how do you do that? You can't buy them at a grocery store or the restaurant supply store. It's too much for them. Like, you can order them. It's going to be crazy expensive. So now you go to a farmer and you say, I want to buy 10,000 cucumbers from you. Okay? You can't make them at home anymore. Like, where are you going to make 10,000 cucumbers at home into pickles? No, you have to wear a little space, rent a little space, a little warehouse. You have to set it up with buckets and infrastructure and water supplies, and you have to get all your spices and your brine solutions at larger scales of it. Set it up. You put your 10,000 cucumbers in. A few days later, you have pickles. 10,000 pickles. What do you do now? Now you have 10,000 pickles. You have to sell them. That little farmer's market, your friends can't eat them, right? That's way too many now. That little farmer's market, you're not going to go through 10,000 pickles on one day. So they have to go to your local stores and say, hey, stores, do you want to sell my pickles? Here's a jar of my pickles. Why don't you sell it? The store's like, yeah, absolutely. We can sell your pickles, but we need to make 30 to 40%. So you got to get your costs down if you want to make any margin, if you want to make any profit. So you go and you engineer your pickles to make some money, and you give them to the store. The store starts selling your pickles. It's great. Everybody loves your pickles. You're making money. They're making money. Everybody loves the flavor of your pickle. You want to grow the business. So now you want to make, say, 1 million pickles. 1 million pickles in pickle world isn't that many pickles. So what happens now? You can't go to that farmer anymore. They don't have 1 million cucumbers. So either you go to a conglomerate of farmers or you find a commercial farmer with commercial contracts. You get a larger warehouse, a larger facility, larger solutions, larger infrastructure, larger equipment. You buy your spices and your brines and you have to hire employees and you make your 1 million pickles. You take 1 million cucumbers that are trucked and freighted into your warehouse and freighted out in more logistics, infrastructure. So now you have 1 million pickles. But your local grocery stores can't sell 1 million pickles. So now you need to distribute your pickles to larger national stores, maybe international stores at this point. So now you have a 1 million pickle business, and it's going great. So the reason I bring up this pickle, and the pickle is an easy example because everybody loves pickles, is because not only from the very beginning of when you were making your 10 pickles to the 1 million pickles, everything about your company has changed. Your staffing has changed, your infrastructure has changed, your recipe has changed, where you get the cucumbers has changed, your distribution has changed, the retail has changed, your margins have changed. Pretty much every part of your team is different now, from when you were a 10 pickle business to a 1 million pickle business. Pretty much every part of your logistics infrastructure has changed. Pretty much every part of your product infrastructure has changed. You are a radically different company. Now, it's important to realize that the example I gave you is for growing a pickle business in the United States. If you are growing your pickle business in your home country, that maturity is highly dependent on the infrastructure and the principles of that country. So in the United States, my first step was local farmers markets, then little local stores. Might be very different. Where I get my solutions, how I talk to farmers, where I get my cucumbers. It was designed in the United States for the United States market to be efficient here, to meet customer demands here. I am intrinsically a US company that has changed completely from when I was a 10 pickle business to when I became a 1 million pickle business. Your company is built the same way, whether you build pickles or software. It is built on the infrastructure, what the human capital infrastructure is in the people you hire, as in the capital infrastructure, the money that you have in, the vendor dependencies, the logistics, the supply chain of your area of operations. So one of the largest challenges that I see when companies try to move their pickle business, I'll just call it a pickle business, from their original country to their new country, is that they don't realize that pretty much every single part of how their company was born and raised has to change, or at least has to take into account that things can be very different in a more mature and evolved market like the United States, and just a different market. So if you've traveled before, as a person, I've traveled quite a bit. I'm sure everybody here has traveled. When you go to a new place, if you're a tourist on a tour bus, all the people kind of look the same. If you spend some more time there, you realize that there are entrenched cultural differences. That there are entrenched differences between a person who grew up, let's say, in Mexico to a person that grew up in the United States, right? A person that grew up, let's say, in Russia to a person that grew up in the United States. The more you get to know the differences, the more you realize that there are these differences. So on the outside, you might look at an American-born business, an American commercialized business, and think, well, this is really similar to what we do. But in reality is, because of this legacy of growing up where you grew up as a company, you are, in fact, a very, very different organization. So every step of this growth from the 10 pickle business to the 1 million pickle business needs to be examined and revalidated for a new market. Now, it's easier said than done. This is particularly challenging, and the best way to do it is with people. So let me talk a little bit about what people are and how they work for your company. So I'm going to give you another example. I know we're full of examples today, but I'll give you another one. Let's say I'm building a house. okay, in the US anywhere. And I'm building it in order to sell it. I want a big, beautiful house, and I want to sell it. I want to make some money. Good business. So I have two options. I need plumbing done in my house. The water pipes, the toilets, things like that. I need my house plumbed. I can hire a plumber for, let's say, $50,000 to do all the plumbing of my house. Okay, the house that I'm planning on selling. Or I can get a plumber that will take 1% of the value of my house as compensation for doing the plumbing. Okay, so I can go to a whole bunch of plumbers and say, hey, plumbers, I'm building this house. I'm going to sell it for a lot of money. This is going to be a great house and a great growing market in a great area. Everybody's going to want to buy my house. I'm going to make millions of dollars off the sale of this house. And I'm willing to give you 1% of that sale if you do the plumbing now without taking cash for it. If you just take 1% of the sale price of the house. Now, if you can make the sale, if you're credible as a storyteller, if you're a credible house building entrepreneur, that's a really good proposition for some plumbers. Now, in practice, not all plumbers are able to do this. They have to buy cheeseburgers for their family. They have to pay their rent. They don't have the money. They don't have the opportunity to do work for you without being compensated for it immediately. And I would say that's probably 9 out of 10 plumbers. Maybe 99 out of 100 plumbers will say, well, I believe you, but I'm just not in a position to do this. But if you get that one plumber that is in a position to do this, that one plumber that says, okay, yeah, I can invest. That plumber is a lot more valuable to you as a house builder than the plumber that you pay $50,000 to. And the reason is pretty simple, is because your incentives are aligned. So that plumber is going to do a good job because he wants the house to sell for a lot of money. That plumber is incentivized to cut corners. And if something goes wrong, if there's a leak, and something always goes wrong in a startup world, in the business world, something always turns left at some point. That plumber is incentivized to help and get the leak fixed. The plumber that you pay $50,000 to is not. If you have another $50,000 to pay them, they might fix the leak, but chances are you might not have that other $50,000 when the times are tough. When times are tough, as they are for a lot of startups, cash is hard to come by. The only currency that is actually worth anything in a startup is not the cash. It's the morale. If everybody's happy, if everybody is aligned around the goal, that's the currency that you trade on. Now, sometimes you do need the cash, and I assure you, when times are tough, that cash is hard to find. So the reason I talk about the plumber is because that equity contributor, that person who is aligned with your mission, with your values, with your personality as a founder, with your team, with your product, is an extremely valuable person for your organization. And plumbing is a core part of that house. And if you're looking for core parts of your organization, let's say the technologists or the sales leaders, it would be good to have them aligned with the values and the mission of the organization. So I recommend, and we'll talk about this in a second, is when you're entering a new market, whether it's an international market or you're entering a new customer segment in your domestic market, and you're starting a brand extension of some sort, for example, is to always find people that are willing to do it for the 1%. Not necessarily the one, but for the equity. Because you know that they are aligned. And you know if these are quality people, and you should always be looking for quality people that are so much better at you than you at what you're hiring them for. If they are truly those people, and you're making a mistake, or they see some market dynamic that you cannot see, these will be the most valuable people to your organization. And they will speak out because it's not money that they already have. This is the return. This is the future promise that they're trying to fight for. So these people are generally much better than regular people in the very beginning, whether you're starting an idea from scratch in your domestic market or whether you're revalidating an idea from scratch in a new market. I would always start with somebody, with a team that's in it for the same reason, whose incentives are aligned. to be successful at the end, not to cash out immediately. So let's talk about the revalidation process. So we're going to talk about this as if you're starting a brand new company in the United States, which effectively you are. So there are two schools of thought. If you were to honestly, I keep talking about business school, but if you were in business school or you went to business school, and by the way, I taught business school, so I'm very familiar with this mindset. And to this day, this is the case. If you are taught to build a business a very traditional way, you would create first a business plan. It doesn't necessarily need to be a document, but it's a business plan of some sort. Often there is a document, and I actually generally do recommend having a business plan document, but it's a different story. You build a management team in accordance with what your plan indicates that you should build. You build the core team, your salespeople, your marketing people, your product people, your scientists, whoever you need. Then you secure funding. You go to investors and say, hey, investors, this is my plan. This is my idea. This is my team. This is my market. This is all my research. This is the product. Give us some money. Invest in us. Then you hire employees, the non-critical, non-core team people with the investor funding. Then you go out and you build a prototype. You build this fancy, let's say, software, hardware, technology prototype, and then you enter the market with that prototype. Okay? Now, it seems reasonable. I know it seems very reasonable. But what happens in this traditional, and I call it the 2002 model, but honestly, it's pervasive to this day. What happens with this traditional way of launching a business is that you don't actually know if anybody wants to buy your stuff until the very last step of this business. And we'll talk about this in a subsequent slide, but this is the point where companies most often fall apart. About 84% of companies fall apart exactly on step 6 of this launch process. So if you want to launch in the US market using kind of the traditional approach, some version of this, by the time you get to 6, you've spent all this money, you have all this legacy costs, you have all this burden, and you don't actually know if anybody wants to buy your stuff here, or if the way you're selling it is the right way of selling it. So the launch, I guess in the more modern way, what I call the revalidation launch, or the launch from the initial, is to build a prototype first. So I know you probably already have a product that works well in your market, but I would build a prototype for the US market, specifically based on what you think Americans want to see if you're entering the United States. I wouldn't use your current prototype that again was born and raised in your home country, like the pickles. I would start something from scratch, or if your current one you think is good enough, go. You launch with that first. Then you go to market. Now, if you're starting a new business, the reason that I build a prototype first, before you have any money. So if you're broke, you have absolutely no money. And then the initial question is, how do I build a prototype if I have no money? And that's a very legitimate question. Now, the reality is, let's say, I'm assuming most folks here are software or software adjacent companies. The cost of developing software can be either astronomically high or it could be nothing. There's really no gray area in between. So astronomically high is you hire, let's say, an offshore development team, and they charge you hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop a software prototype. Nothing is you find a CTO, a capable plumber that believes in the vision of your company that builds a prototype for you. Or you use what I'm a huge fan of, low-code and no-code software development tools to build your prototypes. If you're savvy, you can build a prototype for pretty much nothing except for work. So the expectation is, before you even launch, is can you get plumbers to plumb your house on equity? If you can't get anybody to join your company on equity, that's a huge red flag. That's something that you need to address, because that is the first step in validating a new market, a new product, a new startup idea. And when somebody comes up to me, for example, and says, I have this new idea for a startup, or I want to bring my startup idea, I have my product in my other country, let's say in Poland, and I want to bring it to the United States. What do you think is, how do I test it? How do I test whether I should do that or not? And the first thing I say is, hey, can you build a team here? Can you find somebody who can work on equity? We'll talk about that in a second. So step 1 is you build a prototype. Step 2 is you go to market. Step 3 is you build the core team in response to the market dynamics. So let's say the market wants this product, they want some features, they don't want other features, they're responsive to these types of sales tactics, they're not responsible to others. You build a team around exactly what the market is telling you they want. Now, in the very beginning of validating your idea, you're always going after the low-hanging fruit, the easiest markets for you to get. And you're doubling down on them. When those markets are exhausted, you fix the problem, but that's a mature company issue. Step number 4, if you need the money, you find the money. You secure funding if you need it after you're already in the market, after you already have a core team, and then, and only then, do you actually go out and hire employees. Let me talk about the difference between employees and founders in a subsequent slide. So to go back to the problems of launching the business plan way, the 2002 way, is this concept of the valley of death. About 90% of startups fail within 10 years. Okay, a little bit over. Over 80%, I think about 84% statistically, fail because of marketing and product market fit. What does that mean? Basically, as an early stage startup, there are 2 inflection points in your company where people are happy, where capital can be accessible to you, where these are good points. You have a big hill and you have kind of a little hill. So the little hill is the I have an idea hill. You're excited, you're passionate, you identified this solution and you know is going to change the world once we find a problem or a set of problems that it addresses. You have this invention and you're passionate about it. This is a little hill. This is a hill where you can get people excited to join your company. This is a hill where you can raise money from early stage investors or from friends and family, somebody like that. If you can communicate that, wow, this idea is going to revolutionize everything. When I build it, everybody's going to use it. Everybody's going to love it. That's a good hill. It's a good hill. It's an early hill. It's a small hill, but it's a good hill. And then you have a big hill. The big hill is, I have this product. I have this invention. People are using it. People are loving it. I've built it. It works. People love it. The market exists. They're passionate about it. That's a big hill. You can raise money on this hill. You can find people on this hill. That's a good hill to be on. What happens in between these 2 hills, specifically with a traditional way of launching or revalidating in the United States, is you have what they call the valley of death. This is when you have a fully built product. You have the product. You spent all this money, all this time to build the product, and now you've launched it. Now, by definition, when you're launching it, you have no customers for it. So you spend all this time and you spend all this effort building a product. And it's a mature product. It's a feature-rich product. It's ready to be used by people. Then you launch it and nobody is using it. Now, traditionally, if you look at fundraising, it's not uncommon for people to finance the building of the product themselves. Then they build the product. Then they enter this valley of death when they have a fully mature product and nobody's using it, which, by the way, is a very depressing and stressful time for the team and for everybody involved with the project. This is the point where companies die, 84% of companies. So you enter this valley, and then your strategy from the very beginning is, this is the time where I'm going to find employees, and this is the time where I'm going to find investors. Because you're thinking, I have this demonstrable product. I'm going to show it to people. It's going to blow their socks off. They're going to love it. They're going to invest. They're going to join the company. What happens in practice at this low point, that this is the worst point for you to try to raise money, and this is the worst point for you to try to get people to join your company. Because at this point, you have a fully mature product, and nobody is using it. It's almost validation that nobody wants it. In fact, this point in time that people plan for in order to start raising money at this point is the worst point to raise money at. Raise money or find a team. So if we go back to the previous slide, this is exactly the thing that we're avoiding when we are launching or relaunching a company in a different market by following the 2024 launch model rather than the 2002 launch model. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments, please put them in. I'm happy to discuss. I know a lot of this stuff can seem a little counterintuitive, so I'm happy to have an honest conversation and really dive into the details if you guys want to. So now let's talk about the team. Now, as I talked about, the 1% plumber, that person is probably the most important person, or that group of people, the ones that do plumbing, the ones that do electrical work, the ones that will work on equity for your organization in the very beginning because they're aligned with it, are the most valuable people. So we're going to talk about, from a market entry perspective, we're not going to be in tactics. We're not going to talk about what CRM you should use or project management platform, all that stuff. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that you try revalidating your company with kind of the local human capital supply chain, as in local people that work for your organization in that location that you're entering. We're going to talk about the next few slides about what those people look and smell like and how to get them. Every organization, my advice, and I think most people would agree with me, not everybody, but most people would agree with me, should have two types of governing bodies. Okay, so these are the people that are in charge of the organization. They might be operationally involved, but what they do is they govern the organization. They set the mission, the values for the organization. These two governors' bodies are called the board of directors and the board of advisors. So often outside of the United States, you actually don't see companies with boards of advisors. You almost always see companies with boards of directors, but it's very seldom that I actually see a company from outside the US or the UK that has a board of advisors. So a board of advisors is very different than the board of directors. The advisors, the best way to think about them, they're the soul of your company. And the directors are the brain of your company. So the directors have a legal obligation to make money for the shareholder. That's all they do. That's their fiduciary obligation. That is a law. Just like the CEO has a fiduciary obligation to the organization and to the shareholders. Their job is to make sure that the company brings returns. The advisors, however, have freedom in that. They don't have these legal obligations. So they're more free to say, well, maybe we should work for the common good, or maybe we should, not follow this particular line of commercialization because it might hurt our other businesses, or it might hurt the core values, or we might lose people over it. We might lose core employees because we enter, let's say, in the defense industry. So maybe we shouldn't do that. It's going to cost us money, but it's something to consider. This counterpoint is actually really important to the governance of a company. And having a local board of advisors, let's say in the United States, is a very critical component to understanding what the soul of the American entrepreneurial, the American commercial ecosystem is. These will be the people who say, maybe you shouldn't chase the money here. The board of directors will never legally be able to give you advice like that or have an honest conversation about it. Advisors have unofficial influence, generally speaking. So they can, it's not as structured. You don't need meetings and board minutes and all of those kinds of things that you would generally need with directors to be compliant with board of directors. So they can call you, they see something interesting that happens. They can call you, they can give you guidance. These are people that are experts and respected, but they can be the guidance. Generally, advisors are also very open. You can add and remove advisors as a management team at will. You can say, hey, yeah, you can. I love your background. I love what you do. I love your mindset, whatever criteria you want. And you can say, join our board of advisors. Be an advisor to my organization. Directors don't work like that. Directors are very strict with the membership of the director body of your organization, of the directors governing body. Often they're put there by investors, or at least with influence of your investors. Generally, there'll be independent board directors, and generally a board is recommended to always have a lawyer on it, things like that. So there's definitely best practices for forming boards of directors. But either way, there's a vote, and it's a very rigid membership process. Advisors, on the other hand, are much more flexible. You can put whoever you want there. You can put your customers there. You can put your investors there if you want. Completely up to you, whoever you think adds value to the soul of your company. Advisors are also really good for ad hoc meetings. So let's say there's a crisis, or let's say there's an opportunity, or let's say there's a challenge. Let's say there's something happens that you want to get a brain trust around. You want to get people that know your company, that are dedicated to your company, that are experts with opinions you trust. You want to get them together and brainstorm something. Now, companies that don't have boards of advisors, and boards of advisors are still pretty structured. These are people who realize that they're boards of advisors and they have an obligation to the company to meet, when the company needs them. This isn't just like a high school friend that you call once in a while. This is an organization who are involved with your company. often organizations that don't have advisor boards, they'll lean on their directors for this. And their directors are generally not the right place to have this kind of to have this kind of a brainstorming session. That by the time you bring things to directors, they generally would need to be much more fleshed out. You need to have options and opportunities and paths and things like that, and strategies already developed. And what the directors would do is they would say, this may be a better strategy, or that is a better strategy, or things like that. But again, they represent the interests of the stakeholders, your investors, your shareholders, things like that. So it's a little bit different. Directors generally get paid when your company is mature enough. There is compensation, equity or cash or both to your directors. Advisors don't necessarily need to get paid. It's completely up to you how you structure that. And going back to the products versus securities, advisors solve today's problems. It's a much more instantaneous reaction to what your company really needs. Directors are more structured. They'll solve problems tomorrow. In 3 months, you have a board meeting. And it's important to keep that in mind. Advisors can also bring you a lot of value that you're not familiar with. I've always, in the last 4 companies I've had, I formed boards of advisors far before I formed boards of directors. I actually see them as much more valuable operationally to my organization, especially if I'm entering a new market. I will always get advisors out of that market, and I will structure them, and I will have meetings with them, and I will depend on them and lean on them. And the value you get from these guys is amazing, guys or girls, is amazing. They can join your company when you need them. Operationally, I have hired out of these boards. They can make introductions. These are very valuable assets for your organization. Directors, on the other hand, yes, they're very valuable, but at some point, you're not going to get more from that organization, from that group, than what they're intended to provide. They're intended to provide fiscal guidance. And oversight over your performance as a CEO. And they do their job great for the most part, but leaning on them to do something outside of that job is a little bit of a stretch. So I always recommend, when you're starting a company or you're starting a company in a new area, that you always develop a board of advisors as one of the first go-to-market steps. The next thing I want to talk about is the difference between founders and employees. Founders, if we're going to follow the pickle example, and if you believe what I told you about the pickles and how the pickles evolved, the pickle business evolved in the U.S. market from 10 pickles to 1 million pickles, and how it is a particularly U.S.-centered business, and if you understand that your business in your home country also evolved to be a business in your home country, then the idea is that the founders, the core team, is also one that is particularly tailored to be successful in your home economy, in your home environment. So you would get new founders. I would recommend new founders or a new team for a new market. Let me explain what this means. So a founder is somebody who has influence and shapes the company. They have what they would call skin in the game. It's an American idiom. So if there's something goes wrong, they feel the pain. They're not just getting a paycheck. It's their vision. It's their staying up at night worrying about things. They are committed. These early people, 1 or 2 of them, but these plumbers that worked their butts off for 1% of the company are critically important. They're foundational. They will tell us, are the stubborn CEOs of companies, that, hey, maybe you should look at something different. Maybe you should take this into consideration. So the founders are very important. You can pay them in cash, obviously, but it's important that in the very beginning, that the bulk of their compensation is equity-based, is aligned with the bulk of your compensation. Employees, on the other hand, don't really have influence over a company. I know every company says that their employees have influence, but I assure you that for pretty much every company, their employees do not have influence. So outside of the startups that you run, think about if you had a job for a big company or any company before, did you really have influence? Or was it just something that they told you to kind of keep you to show up every day? Now, I would argue, and I've worked for big companies as well, is that you don't really have influence, and that's the point. If you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. Everybody in an organization is replaceable. Everybody in the organization can be cut out of the organization if they're doing something wrong, or can be moved up in the organization if they're doing something right. That is the intent. Now, if you can't be replaced, if you can be easily replaced, you're not influential. Think about the people who are truly influential in your life. Can you just cut them out? No. There will be a big gap in your life, in your world. So by design, a big company is really good at this. And this is a function of a big company and big company employees, is to have employees have no influence. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs that have had big corporate jobs before, or have worked for large organizations and then start a startup, they treat their startup in the same way that the big corporations treat their employees. They treat startup employees in the same way. But you're missing the point if you do that. The big advantage of a startup is that you don't have to be this rigid. You don't have to have replaceable people. So I recommend when you're starting, you do not have replaceable people. You have people that have real ownership in your organization, that physically own a part of it, that are emotionally committed to it, and they can actually go to the CEO and say, hey, CEO, you should think about this, and have that actually mean something, rather than just playing lip service and pretending that it means something for employee retention. Founders generally face a very high level of risk. High level of risk as in, like this plumber that put in all this work and bought all the plumbing supplies. He put in a lot of risk. He really cares about this company succeeding. Employees, on the other hand, do not. That's not their point. Yeah, they want to have the job for stability, but honestly, jobs come and go. They don't have skin in the game. They're not decision makers. They have a very low level of risk. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is controversial, and I don't even know if I agree with it myself, to be completely honest. In the first few companies I have had no work-life balance. Work-life balance is this idea that you get to relax at home, and you get to work at work. So you have this distinction, this dichotomy in your world. The first few companies I had, I never not thought about my company. 24 hours a day, middle of the night, middle of the day, I'm showering while I'm eating, while I'm talking to friends, while I'm talking to my parents, whoever it is, work is always there in one way or another. Now, and I liked it that way. I thought that worked really great for me. And I wanted the same from the folks I worked with, and many of them subscribed to this, and we got amazing things done with very little resource, and we had amazing ideas at the most random times because we were always thinking about things. Employees, on the other hand, are not this. Employees will come in at 9 and leave at 5, and it's not their job or the intent or the purpose of that person to worry the whole day. The reason that I say I'm not sure about it now is because now I do see the value in having a work-life balance, but I also see in myself and in many founders that have had some successes, that have had some companies, is that work-life balance also represents a lack of hunger. They're not that hungry to succeed anymore. Either psychologically, they don't need to prove something to themselves or to their peers, or financially, maybe they don't really need the money, they don't really need for this to work. So I think as people get less hungry, as they get more mature as entrepreneurs, you do develop a little work-life balance. But as a general rule, as an early stage of a company, I think hunger is a critically and irreplaceable component of a startup success. And then we can go about compensation and things like that. But let me move on to hiring versus recruiting. So recruiting, when you're building that team, that go-to-market team in the United States, and hiring are two very different things. So recruiting, and I actually ran one of my startups was an HR startup, and if I had shared this kind of stuff, I didn't even believe it. I didn't have this framework when I was running my HR company, but this is very much against what most HR professionals would advise you to do. But again, from a startup's perspective, this is what I think represents an optimal path to building a team in a new market. Is recruiting is a continual process. You're always looking for good people. You're always looking for either founders or employees, but you're always out there. You're always asking. You're always looking for good people. Even if you don't need anybody right now, even if you have extra people already, you're always on the hunt for something good to happen. You're always hungry for those great people to join your organization. Hiring, on the other stage, is you have a particular job and you need somebody to do that job. So you hire a person that you need to sit on Excel all day, or do you need to make cold calls. have a specific job, and you need somebody to do that job. And that's perfectly fine. And you should do hiring. But you should always also be doing recruiting. You should always be sourcing candidates. You should always be looking around. You should always be looking at other startups that might be failing and take their people. It sounds dark, it sounds morbid, but I've hired some of my best employees from other startups that have gone away. So a startup, things go left, things fail. It's not the fault of the employees. A lot of the folks in a failing company are excellent people. All of them are, from the CEO to the employees. If I know that somebody ran or was involved with a failing company, I actually think very highly of them. I don't think poorly of them at all. I think they tried, they did their best, they failed, they're stronger now as an entrepreneur. So I'm always looking at other companies. When I would do investment a long time ago, I would always tell my companies, like, hey, these companies, they might be going away. Look at their people. Their people are excellent. So always look at your cohort, always look around you, always be looking for people. You should always be building a talent pool. This is a good long-term strategy. This is also very good when market conditions change and they're dynamic. So hiring is what big companies do. Hiring is you have a job that needs to be done and you hire somebody who's capable and qualified to do that job. They're replaceable, but that job needs to be done. And realistically, that job is probably going to be outsourced to AI in the next 10 years. But that's hiring. Now, recruiting, that's not a job that you can outsource to AI, at least not in the immediate future. Because this is not a job that needs to be done. This is a job that hasn't been invented yet. This is a market that you may be pivoting into. This is a market, an opportunity that you might get because this person becomes available. This happens a lot. The right person becomes available because you're always looking, and that person brings a whole new market, a new go-to-market approach for your organization. It's a very valuable perspective, and it's a very valuable tool set. By being rigid in your human resources, in your acquisition, personnel acquisition strategy, you're actually limiting yourself a lot to your capacity. The big advantage of a startup versus a big company is that a startup doesn't have as much sunk cost. It doesn't have as much cost to pivoting the organization. It can change. It can start doing something different when the market evolves. A year ago, LLMs became very popular. A lot of startups that were able to pivot to using generative AI or other AI, functionality are thriving. Big companies to this day can't really pivot that well. Now, that's not a bug. It's actually a feature. Big companies have a lot of legacy costs. They have expenses. They have a lot of shareholders. It's very expensive and burdensome for them to pivot. That's a big ship. It's very hard to steer. By design, it's a good thing. A startup is a tiny little speedboat. It can steer and go in any direction, anytime at once. And that is the big advantage of a startup. Now, if you come to it from a big company perspective, or you have a company in your home country and it functions the same way, and you want to bring that rigid structure to the United States market, you're giving up the biggest advantage that your startup has: the ability to steer, the ability to pivot, the ability to enter new markets, to expand into new horizons, to find things that haven't been found before. If you do this as an established company, you're giving up that advantage. And that's the biggest advantage that you have as a startup. And that's the reason that startups are accelerating past their incumbents as far as the S&P 500 goes, as far as stock market valuations, is because they're quick to jump on trends. Innovation is accelerating much faster because they don't have these legacy burdens that established companies have. So that's the difference between hiring and recruiting when entering a new market. So I know you guys aren't here, a lot of folks. So the question I get generally is, how do I find people? How do I explore these things when I'm not physically there? And frankly, it's hard. It's much harder to do these things when you're not physically in country. It's harder to go to networking events or to meet random people or to be known or to communicate your vision. But there are platforms out there, online platforms, that I do recommend everybody get accustomed to. There are some of them here on this slide, and on this slide as well. So I think you're going to get this presentation. I know the text is probably too small for anybody to see what these platforms are called. But everywhere from Reddit groups to big accelerator communities like Y Combinator and many others, there are a lot of opportunities to meet people online. But obviously, the best thing to do is to actually show up in person. So I think that'll do it for me. I think we're running out of time. It's been a pleasure speaking with everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. There's just one question. If we can go through really fast. You mentioned something about it, but what do you think about giving stock options?
Stock options are great. Stock options are great. So I always, in the very beginning of a company, you don't want to give out options. You want to give out stock. When the company first starts, this is called founder equity, founder shares. They're treated differently by the tax authorities. They're taxed differently. That's the thing you want to give out. As the company matures and has a valuation, you want to go for something called in the United States a 409A valuation, which will give a value to your stock options, and then you want to give out stock options. Yes, I actually, when I hire people, I always give them, I have a very loose structure for my option pool, right? What they call a treasury in a company. So there's always a lot of stuff in there that I'm able to give out. And I actually give employees a choice. I give them a spreadsheet. I can give you this much options, or I can give you this much cash. And there's scenarios: more cash, more options; more cash, less options; more options, less cash. And I'll let them choose. What do you want? Do you want the more options, or do you want the more cash? And honestly, as part of the getting to know a person thing, because this happens very early in the process of getting to know somebody, it actually gives me a lot of insight into them. And a lot of people really want the options. And options are great for you as a founder because they cost you nothing. They're absolutely free, but you get amazing benefit for them. You get amazing people doing amazing things, truly committed to your company. So yes, I am very happy to give out portions of my company in options, in bonds, in warrants, and whatever security mechanism you want to use. Very happy to give it out because I know that what I'm getting for it is worth far more than what I'm giving up.
Great. Christina.
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and open it up for questions for Mike or questions for us as the CIC team about the programs that we offer and any support that we can give to startups. Feel free to add your questions in the chat. I'm also going to leave my email here in case folks wants to communicate with us. Voy a hacer un pequeño agradecimiento en español a todos por participar, por su tiempo, por escucharnos y dejarles saber que pueden hacer preguntas en español. Así que estamos abiertos para escuchar preguntas. We have a question here, Mike.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you know how much stock to give to people you want to recruit when you're early stage? You don't. The general rule of thumb is there are websites and calculators that you can use. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I would just have a conversation with somebody. If they're critical to your company, if they're really critical to your company, then they should be compensated as somebody critical to your company. So let's say you want to hire, you're a CEO and you have this idea, but you can't, and let's say you have a software product and you have this idea, but you don't have any ability to build it. You don't know how, you're not a technical person at all. You just have this idea for a software. So you want to recruit a CTO, and you find somebody who is interested in building your product for you or with you as a partner, as a co-owner of the company. They're critical. They would get 20, 30, 40, 50% of the organization. They're critical to your organization. Now, the caveat is that when you do give out stock, unlike options also have vesting schedules, but stocks should always have a vesting schedule. So generally, the default, the kind of industry standard in the US is you have a 4-year vesting, as in you give somebody, let's say 20% of your company, hypothetically. They don't actually own it until they work for the company for 4 years. So it vests piece by piece over a period of 4 years. And in addition to that, generally there's a little cliff. A cliff is they don't get the first installment of their equity allotment until a certain amount of time passes. So until 3 months with the company or until 6 months with the company. Some people have a year-long cliff. I think that's too far, but like So they don't get any equity until they're already 6 months with the company. And when they are 6 months with the company, they get what they had already vested in, and they start vesting into future things. Now, it's important just from a company functional perspective, because if you hire somebody and give them a bunch of stock and then they leave, it's really bad for the company to have a bunch of stock gone with a person that's also not involved with the company. It's just bad for a lot of different reasons. So you don't want to avoid that scenario. But as far as people having ownership, yeah, I would definitely. I'm very generous with the equity I give out. There's this old adage about it's better to have 1% of Google than 100% of nothing. So if these people are critical, I would give them a good amount of equity. And a lot of this comes down to a conversation. How much do you want? How much do they want? And just start negotiation there. There's no science. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's really no science to how much they give to give. It's art, but it has to be respectful. If we have any other questions, please feel free to put them in.
Hay una pregunta para Cristina. There's a question for Cristina. Do you have any acceleration offer?
Yes, thank you for asking. In fact, we are working with a team from Impacta VC to offer a brand new program that will be starting in August all the way to October. I know the Impacta team will be sending information out on how to apply, how to be part of the program, but we're really excited to be collaborating on this soft landing program that we're doing together. The program will be open to startups. It will run from, as I said, the end of August to mid-October. It will be comprised of a virtual portion where we will be doing sessions with Mike, in fact. We'll be talking about pitching, investment, product market fit, how to fit your product and solutions to the US market, or actually how to find the right types of problems to solve. And then it will have a 2-week component in the US in October. And I believe the team from Impacta will probably be following up with some information afterwards.
Yeah, that's correct. So I have a personal question. There is some city in USA right now that do you suggest do the soft landing from the Latin American founders? Or it
Mike,
doesn't matter?
I'm sorry, the question, which city?
Is there any city that you recommend to be
Miami,
selected?
100%.
Miami, yeah? And that, why is that?
Miami.
Why?
It's very close to the United States. That was a joke. Miami is a very good soft landing point for Latin American companies. Culturally, it's similar. Linguistically, it's similar. It's the closest part of the United States to Latin American culture. And coincidentally, there's a very rich innovation ecosystem in Miami. So I'm very active in the Miami ecosystem. I enjoy it here. I spent most of my entrepreneurial career in Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a very mature ecosystem as well. But the Miami ecosystem is actually really good, and it's very helpful for Latin American founders. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of people here. There's a lot of opportunity to hire and meet people and networking events. So it's not just a vacation place. It's actually a really good place, I think, to bring a company from Latin America.
And on top of that, as Michael said, we're very close to the United States. So even if your customers or the industry may be in another area, you have direct flights to anywhere in the United States. Is really close by, and you can set up personally with your family here, and then connect with your business where your customers wherever they are.
Yeah, and it's just a good place to live. It's sunny. It's happy. It's just a good place.
And taxes are low.
And no taxes. That's right.
So we are running out of time, but do you have any last advice for these entrepreneurs? Remember, they are also raising. They're doing fundraising at the moment, so they are giving a lot of no as answer. So do you have any recommendation to face that or coping that rejection that they're having?
If they're getting a lot of no's, that's great. That's exactly what should be happening. This is the entrepreneurial path. So every company, I've raised millions, and every company I've pitched hundreds of times before I got the first check or before the first commitment. This is very much part of the entrepreneurial journey. One thing that I would recommend is that you really develop a good pitch. You have to understand what investors actually want. We didn't cover that today because it's really outside the scope of what we're talking about, but investors do look for certain things, and they really want certain things to happen. It's about realizing that why investors make money, what they're investing in, what they like to see. Because again, when we talked about selling products and selling securities, I bet, like on that slide, everybody here knows a lot about their products, but I bet very few people actually know about their securities. And so learning about how do you sell stock, what is the difference in selling stock? And I talked about that a little bit, but it wasn't really the point of this. That's really key and important. So, but the more you do it, the more you'll realize it, but practice makes perfect. Keep working at it. Don't worry. Everybody fails. Everybody fails hundreds and hundreds of times. And if you're not failing, you're honestly doing something wrong. I would be very surprised.
Cool. Christina, any final words for the...
I think my lasting comment, it's very tied to what Mike talked about how to do business before and how to do business now. I would recommend in your process of expanding to a new market, coming to the market, doing some research, speaking to customers. The last thing that we want is for someone to sell their house in their home country, move their entire family, and then once they're here, say, okay, where are my customers and how do I find them? No. We hope that you do this in a progressive way, taking little steps, learnings, and with those learnings, pivoting and getting closer to the final offering.
Great. Thank you so much, guys, for the time. It was a really good talk. There's a lot of thank you in the comments, so people liked it. This session was recorded, so if you want to rewatch it and take notes, it will be available on the portal. And you guys, I hope to see you in September in Miami when we are there with a few companies from this batch. Okay, so thank you so much from Impacta for your time, and have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.